I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32, and until 3 months ago, I believed family meant unconditional love and support. I was wrong. When I needed them most, facing a critical surgery that could save my vision. My parents chose my sister Madison's lavish wedding over being there for me. The betrayal cut deeper than any scalpel could, leaving me questioning everything I thought. I knew about the people who raised me, but sometimes life has a way of revealing hidden truths when you least expect them. While I was recovering alone, in my hospital bed, our family lawyer was reading Grandma Eleanor's will to a room full of shocked faces. What he revealed that day would expose 32 years of lies, favoritism, and a secret that would turn our family's hierarchy upside down. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me. This story is about discovering that sometimes the people who seem to matter least hold the most power of all. To understand how deeply my parents' betrayal cut, you need to know about Madison. My younger sister has always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. At 29, she's 3 years younger than me, but she's lived those years as if the world owed her everything, and somehow it always delivered. Madison never had to work for anything. While I was getting my first job at 16, saving for college, and building my graphic design career from the ground up, Madison was floating through life on charm and our parents' credit cards. She went to expensive private schools, took art classes. She never finished, and traveled Europe for a year finding herself. While I was working 60-hour weeks to establish my design firm, the wedding invitation that arrived 6 months ago was a perfect reflection of everything Madison represents. In our family, embossed gold lettering on cream cardstock, complete with tissue paper overlays, and a separate reception card. The whole thing probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Mitchell request the honor of your presence. At the marriage of their daughter, Madison Rose, to James Edward Whitmore III. Even the invitation screamed privilege and perfection. I remember holding that invitation in my hands, feeling the weight of the expensive paper, and thinking about how much effort and money went into making Madison's day perfect. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was more like a familiar ache, the same one I felt my entire life when I watched our parents pour their attention, resources, and unconditional love into my sister while I remained the responsible, dependable background player. Madison's engagement party had been a lavish affair at the country club. Her bridal shower was a weekend retreat in Napa Valley. The bachelorette party involved a private villa in CABO. Each event was documented extensively on social media, with our parents beaming proudly in every photo. They'd even hired a wedding planner, not just any wedding planner, but the most exclusive one in the city. Meanwhile, I was the one who actually helped coordinate everything behind the scenes. I designed the wedding invitations, the programs, the table cards, and even the thank you notes. I spent countless hours perfecting the layout, choosing fonts, and ensuring every detail met Madison's exacting standards. Of course, I did it all for free. Family, right? But that's always been my role. I'm the fixer, the organizer, the one who makes sure everything runs smoothly while someone else takes the credit. When Madison needed her college applications essay edited, I did it. When she totaled her car, I helped her navigate the insurance claims. When she needed a job reference, I connected her with my clients. I've been cleaning up Madison's messes and supporting her dreams for as long as I can remember. Our parents never seemed to notice the disparity. They saw Madison's sparkle and charm, her ability to light up a room and make everyone laugh. They saw my competence and reliability as just who I was, steady, capable Sarah who didn't need the same level of attention or support. It was as if they believed I was naturally self-sufficient, while Madison needed their constant care and financial backing to thrive. The truth is, I learned early that love in our family was conditional on being useful, on not making waves, on being the daughter who didn't cause problems. So I became exactly the daughter who solved problems instead of creating them. The letter from Dr. Martinez arrived on a Tuesday morning in early March, just 2 months before Madison's wedding. I remember standing in my kitchen, coffee, mug in hand, staring at the official letterhead from the ophthalmology clinic. The words seemed to blur together as I read them once, then twice, trying to process what they meant. severe retinal detachment in the right eye with secondary complications requiring immediate surgical intervention. The medical terminology felt cold and clinical, but the implications were crystal clear. Without surgery, I would lose my vision, in my right eye permanently. With surgery, there was an 85% chance of preserving most of my sight, but the window for intervention was narrow, ideally within 3 to 4 weeks. I set the letter on my granite countertop and sank into one of my kitchen chairs, the weight of the diagnosis settling over me like a heavy blanket. As a graphic designer, my vision wasn't just important, it was everything. My career, my independence, my entire sense of self was built around my ability to see color, composition, and detail with precision. The thought of losing that was terrifying. Enough. But what came next was the scheduling nightmare that would change everything. Dr. Martinez's office called that afternoon to discuss surgery dates. The earliest available slot was May 15th, exactly the same day as Madison's wedding. I asked about alternatives, explaining the conflict, but the surgical scheduler's voice was matter of fact. Dr. Martinez only performs these procedures on Mondays and Fridays due to the complexity and recovery requirements. The next available date would be June 8th, but given the urgency noted in your file, Dr. Martinez strongly recommends against waiting that long. I hung up the phone and immediately called the clinic back, asking to speak with Dr. Martinez directly. When he finally returned my call that evening, his tone was gentle but firm. "Sarah, I understand this is difficult timing, but retinal detachment is a medical emergency. Every day we wait increases the risk of permanent vision loss. The inflammation and scar tissue formation accelerate rapidly with this type of injury. If we wait until June, we're looking at a significantly reduced chance of successful outcome." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been living with gradual vision changes for months, attributing them to stress and long hours in front of the computer. The flashing lights, the gradual loss of peripheral vision, the strange shadow that seemed to fall on my right eye, I dismissed it all as fatigue. If I'd sought help sooner, maybe the timing wouldn't have been so catastrophic. That night, I sat in my home office surrounded by half-finished design projects, trying to imagine what it would be like to work with compromised vision. I touched the corner of my eye gently, feeling the slight tenderness that had become my constant companion. The diagnosis letter lay open on my desk, the medical terminology now familiar after reading it dozens of times. For 32 years. I'd been the daughter who adapted, who worked around obstacles, who found solutions instead of creating problems. But this wasn't something I could design my way out of or manage with better planning. This was my health, my future, and possibly my career hanging in the balance. For the first time in my life, I needed my family to choose me first. I had no idea how naive that hope would prove to be. I called my parents the next morning, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed their number. Mom answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Oh, Sarah." Perfect timing. "I was just going over the final head count with the caterer. Did you finish the place cards?" "The calligrapher needs them by." "Mom?" I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need to talk to you and Dad about something important. Can you both get on the phone?" There was a pause, then the familiar shuffle of the phone being passed. "Sarah?" Dad's voice joined the call. "What's going on? Is everything okay with the wedding designs?" "No, this isn't about the wedding. I got some medical news yesterday that I need to share with you both." I took a deep breath and explained the diagnosis, the urgency of the surgery, and the scheduling conflict. I spoke clearly and calmly, laying out the medical facts just as Dr. Martinez had explained them to me. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice tight with what I initially mistook for concern. "Oh, Sarah, that's really unfortunate timing." "Unfortunate timing?" I repeated, confused by the understatement. "Well, yes," Dad chimed in. "Madison's wedding has been planned for over a year. The venue, the vendors, the guests flying in from across the country, we can't exactly reschedule everything because of a surgery." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "I'm not asking you to reschedule the wedding. I'm telling you that I need surgery on the same day, and I was hoping you could be there for me." "But Sarah?" Mom's voice took on that familiar, tone she used when explaining why Madison's needs came first. This is Madison's special day. She's been dreaming of this wedding since she was a little girl. We can't miss it. Surely you can schedule the surgery for a different day? I explained again about the medical urgency, the limited surgical windows, the risk of permanent vision loss. But even as I spoke, I could hear the dismissive silence on the other end of the line. They weren't really listening. They were calculating, weighing my medical emergency against their social obligations. "Look, sweetheart," Dad finally said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. "I'm sure the surgery will go fine. You're young and healthy. But we've already paid deposits that we can't get back, and Madison would be devastated if we weren't there. This is probably the most important day of her life. And this might be the most important surgery of mine," I said quietly. "Don't be so dramatic," Mom sighed. "It's outpatient surgery, right? You'll be home the same day. You won't even remember. We weren't there." That's when I realized they'd already made their choice. There was no real consideration, no weighing of options, no acknowledgement of what this meant for me. In their minds, Madison's wedding a party essentially outweighed my medical crisis. The text messages that followed over the next few days made their priorities even clearer. Instead of checking on my preoperative appointments or asking how I was handling the stress, I received a steady stream of wedding logistics. "Can you adjust the font size on the table numbers? Madison thinks they're too small. The florist needs final approval on the centerpiece height. Can you call her? Madison wants to add 2 more songs to the reception playlist. Can you coordinate with the DJ?" Each message felt like a small knife. A reminder that even facing potential vision loss, my value to the family remained tied to what I could do for Madison's wedding. There was no "how are you feeling?" or "are you scared?" or "do you need anything before your surgery?" Just an endless list of tasks and the growing realization that I would face the most frightening day of my life completely alone. May 10th arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself understood the somber nature of the day. I woke at 5 a.m., my stomach empty as required for the anesthesia, and checked my phone one last time for any message from my family. Nothing. By now, they'd be in the final preparations for Madison's wedding, scheduled to begin at 4 p.m. The preoperative. Instructions had been clear. Arrive at the surgical center by 7 a.m., bring someone to drive you home, plan for a full day of recovery. I'd arranged for my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, to be my emergency contact since I had no family available. The irony of a 70-year-old woman I barely knew being more present for my surgery. Though my own parents wasn't lost on me, I sat in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by other patients who had their spouses, children, or friends beside them. The visitor log at the front desk showed the stark reality of my situation. Every other name had family members listed next to it. Next to mine, blank. Sarah Mitchell? The surgical nurse called my name, and I gathered my things, walking alone, through the doors that separated the waiting area from the preoperative bays. The nurse, whose name tag read Jennifer, noticed my solitary status immediately. "Is your ride waiting outside?" she asked kindly as she helped me into the hospital gown. "My neighbor will pick me up later," I said, not mentioning that Mrs. Chun had never driven me anywhere before today and barely knew me. Beyond our occasional hallway conversations, Jennifer's expression softened. "No family able to make it today?" "They had a prior commitment," I said, the understatement of the century. As the 4 went into my arm and the monitors began their steady beeping. I found myself thinking about all the times I'd sat in hospital, waiting rooms for other people. When Madison had her appendix removed in college, I drove 4 hours to be there. When Dad had his hernia surgery, I took 3 days off work to help with his recovery. When Mom had her gallbladder removed, I managed the household, coordinated meals, and handled all the post-operative care instructions. But today, as I faced the possibility of losing my vision, I was alone. Dr. Martinez appeared beside my bed, his surgical cap already in place. "How are you feeling, Sarah?" "Nervous," I admitted. "That's completely normal. This is a delicate procedure, but I've performed hundreds of these surgeries. We're going to take excellent care of you." He paused, glancing around the empty space beside my bed. I know the timing of this surgery has been difficult with your family obligations. I almost laughed at his careful phrasing. My sister's wedding is today. I see. His expression remained professional, but I caught a flicker of something surprise. Maybe disappointment in his eyes. Well, let's make sure you can see clearly for the next family celebration. The anesthesia mask descended, and my last conscious thought was wondering if there would be a next family celebration that included me. I woke up in recovery 3 hours later. My right eye covered with a protective shield, my depth perception completely disoriented. The first sensation was relief. I could see light and shadow through the bandage, which the recovery nurse assured me was a positive sign. The surgery went very well, she said, checking my vital signs. Dr. Martinez was able to repair the detachment completely. You'll need to keep your head positioned upright for the next week, and we'll see you for follow-up appointments, but the prognosis is excellent. I should have felt joy, relief, gratitude. Instead, I felt a profound emptiness. There was no one to share the good news with, no one to help me navigate the post-operative instructions, no one to drive me home except a kind neighbor who was doing a favor for someone she barely knew. Mrs. Chun arrived at 2 p.m., looking nervous but determined. "How did it go, dear?" she asked in her gentle, accented English. "Very well, thank you," I said. My voice still hoarse from the anesthesia. As we drove home, I caught sight of my reflection in the passenger mirror pale, bandaged, alone. Somewhere across town, my family was celebrating Madison's perfect day, toasting her happiness, taking pictures that would fill photo albums for years to come. Not one of them knew whether my surgery had succeeded or failed. The social media assault began at 6 p.m., just as I was trying to manage my first post-surgery meal with one functioning eye. My phone buzzed incessantly with notifications as the wedding photos started flooding Instagram, Facebook, and every other platform where my family and friends documented their lives. The first photo was of Madison in her wedding dress, a stunning white gown that cost more than I made in 3 months. She looked radiant, absolutely glowing with happiness, as our mother fastened the delicate pearl buttons along her spine. The caption read, "Getting ready with my beautiful daughter on her special day. Hashtag mother of the bride, hashtag perfect day, hashtag bless." I stared at the image through my one good eye, noting the careful staging, the professional lighting, the way every detail had been orchestrated for maximum visual impact. This was the moment my parents had chosen over sitting beside my hospital bed. More photos followed in rapid succession. Dad walking Madison down the aisle, tears in his eyes as he prepared to give away his little princess. The happy couple, exchanging vows in the elegant garden venue I'd helped select. Madison laughing as James slipped the ring onto her finger. Extended family members I hadn't seen in years, all gathered to witness this perfect day. Each image was a knife twist, not because I begrudged Madison her happiness, but because of what was glaringly absent from every single photo. No empty chair marked for me. No mention of my absence. No acknowledgement that a family member was missing because she was fighting to save her vision. The professional photographer had captured every moment with artistic precision. The golden hour lighting during the ceremony, the sparkle of Madison's diamond earrings, the joy on our parents' faces as they watched their daughter marry into one of the city's most prominent families. These weren't just wedding photos. They were documentation of everything my family valued most. My phone rang, and I saw Madison's name on the screen. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe she was calling to check on my surgery, to bridge the gap that had opened between us. "Sarah!" Her voice was breathless with excitement and champagne. "Oh my God, the wedding was absolutely perfect. Everything you designed looked incredible. The place cards were gorgeous, and everyone commented on how beautiful the invitations were. You're so talented." "Thank you," I managed, my voice still weak from the surgery and medication. "I'm so sorry you couldn't make it because of your eye thing," she continued, clearly not really listening to my tone. "But honestly, you didn't miss much. Well, except for the most amazing day of my life." She laughed, and I could hear the celebration continuing in the background. My eye thing was how she'd reduced my medical emergency. Not surgery, not the risk of permanent vision loss. Just an inconvenient eye thing that had kept me from our perfect day. "How did the surgery go?" she asked, almost as an afterthought. "It went well. Dr. Martinez is able to repair the damage." "Oh, that's great. I knew everything would be fine." "You're so strong, Sarah. You always figure everything out." And then, without missing a beat, she launched into a detailed description of every moment of her wedding day, the flowers, the food, the speeches, the dancing. I listened with growing numbness as she described the celebration I'd helped plan, but couldn't attend, the family gathering that had proceeded perfectly without me. She never asked about my pain level, my recovery instructions, or whether I needed help with anything. She was calling to share her joy, not to check on my well-being. After hanging up, I scrolled through more photos. There was our family's traditional group shot. Mom, Dad, Madison, and James posed elegantly beneath the oak tree where the ceremony had taken place. The space where I would have stood was seamlessly filled by James's groomsmen, as if I'd never been part of the family composition at all. The final photo of the evening was perhaps the most painful. It showed my parents dancing with the happy couple, all four of them laughing at something James had said. The caption read, "Perfect end to a perfect day with our perfect family. #blessed, #new beginnings, #family love dot." I screenshot that photo, though I'm not sure why. Maybe I needed evidence of this moment, proof of where my family's priorities truly lay. Or maybe I needed to remember how it felt to be erased so completely from their narrative. As I finally turned off my phone and tried to sleep with my head propped upright per the doctor's orders, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. Inside me, the hurt was still there, sharp and present, but underneath it was something else, a cold clarity about who my family really was and what I actually meant to them. They'd had their perfect day. Now I needed to figure out what came next for mine. During the long days of recovery that followed, when I was confined to keeping my head upright and avoiding sudden movements, my mind wandered frequently to Grandma Eleanor. She'd passed away 8 months earlier, just before Madison's wedding. Planning had reached its fever pitch, and I found myself missing her with an intensity that surprised me. Eleanor Mitchell had been different from the rest of our family. Where my parents were status conscious and appearance focused, Grandma Eleanor had possessed a quiet wisdom and an ability to see through facades that had always made me feel understood. She'd lived in the same modest 2-bedroom house for 40 years, despite having the means to upgrade, and she valued substance over show in everything she did. I remembered the last real conversation we'd had, just weeks before she died. I'd stopped by her house with homemade soup when she was recovering from a mild bout of pneumonia. We'd sat in her small kitchen, surrounded by the ceramic roosters she collected and the herbs she grew on her windowsill. "You know, Sarah," she said, her voice still strong despite her 86 years, "I've been watching this family for a long time. Sometimes the people who seem to matter least end up mattering most." At the time, I thought she was speaking generally, maybe reflecting on her own childhood as the youngest of 7 siblings. But now, lying in my bed with my eye healing, I wondered if she'd been trying to tell me something more specific. Grandma Eleanor had always treated Madison and me differently than our parents did. Where they showered Madison with attention and gifts, Eleanor had quietly invested her time in me. She taught me to cook her famous apple pie, showing me how to roll the crust just thin enough and season the filling with her secret blend of spices. She'd listened to my dreams about building my design business, offering practical advice about managing money and dealing with difficult clients. Most tellingly, she never seemed impressed by Madison's dramatics or charm. When Madison would burst into family gatherings with stories of her latest adventures or crises, Eleanor would listen politely, but then turn her attention to me. "How's your work going, dear?" She'd ask, "Are you taking care of yourself?" She was the only family member who ever asked those questions. During my recovery, I found myself pulling out the small photo album Eleanor had given me for my 30th birthday. It was filled with pictures I'd never seen before, photos of me as a child, teenager, and young adult that she'd apparently been collecting for years. Unlike the formal family portraits that dominated our house, these were candid shots. Me reading in her garden, helping her bake cookies, working on art projects at her kitchen table, On the last page, she'd included a handwritten note. Sarah, my dear granddaughter, you have always been the heart of this family, even when others couldn't see it. Remember that true worth isn't measured by the attention you receive, but by the love you give and the strength you possess. Keep this close to your heart. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. I treasured that note, but I'd never fully understood its weight until now. Sitting alone in my apartment, recovering from surgery my family had deemed less important than a party, I began to see Eleanor's words differently. She hadn't just been offering comfort, she'd been trying to prepare me for something. I remembered other small moments that now seemed significant. The way Eleanor had always asked detailed questions about my business, taking notes as I explained, my client projects and financial goals. How she'd insisted on having my contact information written down in multiple places, saying it was for emergencies. The conversations she'd had with me about family loyalty versus self-respect. Discussions that had seemed philosophical at the time, but now felt like gentle warnings. There was also her mysterious comment at Madison's engagement party. While everyone else had been gushing about the upcoming wedding, Eleanor had pulled me aside. Things aren't always what they seem in families, Sarah. Sometimes the people who think they're most important discover they're not. And sometimes the people who've been overlooked find out they've been seen all along. I'd assumed she was talking about wedding stress and family dynamics. But what if she'd been referring to something more concrete? Eleanor had been sharp as a tack right up until the end, managing her own finances and legal affairs with the same quiet competence she'd brought to everything else. She'd never needed help with paperwork or decision-making, preferring to handle important matters independently. Even when my parents had offered to assist with her estate planning, she'd politely declined, saying she had everything well in hand. Now I wondered what exactly she'd had in hand, and why she'd been so secretive about it. The woman who'd given me a photo album full of memories and a note about being the heart of the family might have had more to say than I'd realized. Whatever Eleanor had planned, I had the feeling I was about to find out. 3 weeks after my surgery, as I was finally starting to feel human again, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. My vision had improved dramatically. Dr. Martinez had been right about the excellent prognosis, and I was slowly returning. To work on modified hours, Ms. Mitchell? This is Robert Henderson from Henderson, Walsh & Associates. I was your grandmother Eleanor Mitchell's attorney. I set down my coffee, suddenly alert. Yes, Mr. Henderson, how can I help you? I'm calling to inform you that you're named as a beneficiary in your grandmother's will. We need to schedule a formal reading with all the beneficiaries present. Would you be available this Friday at 2 p.m.? I'm sorry, I think there might be some mistake, I said slowly. My parents handled all of Grandma Eleanor's affairs after she passed. They never mentioned anything about a will reading. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ms. Mitchell, I can assure you there's no mistake. Your grandmother was very specific about who should be present for the reading of her will. Your parents and sister have already been contacted and confirmed their attendance. They have? I was confused. No one had mentioned anything to me about Eleanor's will, let alone a formal reading. But it's been 8 months since she passed away. Why is this happening now? Your grandmother left very specific instructions about the timing of the will reading. She requested that it take place only after certain circumstances had unfolded. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, but I can tell you that all conditions have now been met. I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of circumstances? As I said, I can't discuss the specifics until all beneficiaries are present. But I can tell you that your grandmother was quite thorough in her planning. She anticipated various scenarios. The way he said various scenarios made it sound like Eleanor had been playing chess while the rest of us thought we were playing checkers. Mr. Henderson, can you at least tell me if I need to bring anything to this meeting? Just yourself, Miss Mitchell, and perhaps an open mind. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman with some very specific ideas about justice and family. After I hung up, I immediately called my parents. Mom answered, her voice surprisingly tense when I explained why I was calling. Oh, that, she said dismissively. Yes, we got a call from some lawyer, probably just formalities. You know how these legal things work, lots of paperwork for simple matters. But why didn't anyone tell me about it? We don't want to bother you while you were recovering from your surgery. Dad's voice joined the call. Besides, we assumed it would just be the standard stuff, her personal effects, maybe a small savings account to divide up. Something in their tone didn't ring true. There was an undercurrent of nervousness, a careful quality to their words that suggested they knew more than they were letting on. Did Grandma Eleanor leave much of an estate? I asked. Oh, you know your grandmother, Mom said quickly. She lived very simply. That little house, her old car, some jewelry. Nothing significant, but I remembered Eleanor's house differently. Yes, it was modest, but it was also immaculate and filled with antiques that I now realized might have been quite valuable. Her car was old but well-maintained, and she'd always seemed comfortable financially, never wanting for anything or asking for help with bills. I'll see you Friday then, I said. Sarah, Dad's voice had a warning tone. Don't get your hopes up about inheriting anything substantial, and please don't make a scene if things aren't divided the way you might expect. That comment stopped. Nicole, why would I make a scene? And why was he already managing my expectations about the will's contents? After hanging up, I sat in my living room staring at Mr. Henderson's business card. The law firm's name was embossed in elegant script, suggesting they weren't the kind of attorneys who handled simple estate paperwork. This was a serious firm, the kind that dealt with complex legal matters and substantial assets. I spent the rest of the week wondering what Eleanor had been planning and why my parents seemed so nervous about a simple will reading. By Friday morning, I felt like I was preparing for something much more significant than the distribution of a few personal belongings. I had no idea how right I was. The law offices of Henderson, Walsh and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building, all polished marble and floor-to-ceiling windows. I arrived 15 minutes early, partly from nervousness and partly because I wanted to observe my family's behavior before the meeting began. The receptionist directed me to a conference room, where my parents and Madison were already seated around. A massive mahogany table. The tension in the room was palpable. Mom was fidgeting with her wedding ring. Dad was checking his phone repeatedly, and Madison looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Sarah. Madison's greeting was overly bright, the kind of forced cheerfulness that meant she was uncomfortable. How's your eye? You look great. Much better, thank you. I took a seat across from them, noting how they clustered together on one side of the table while leaving me isolated on the other. Even in seating arrangements, the family dynamics were crystal clear. I still can't believe Eleanor went through all this formal legal nonsense, Mom said, her voice carrying that dismissive tone she used when things didn't go according to her plans. She could have just left her things to us to distribute. All this ceremony seemed so unnecessary. Maybe she wanted to make sure everything was handled properly, I suggested. Dad shot me a look that was hard to interpret. Your grandmother always did have a flair for the dramatic in her later years. Before I could ask what he meant by that, the door opened and Mr. Henderson entered. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, wearing an impeccably tailored suit and carrying a leather portfolio that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. He settled into the chair at the head of the table and opened his portfolio with deliberate precision. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this is likely to be an unusual will reading. Mrs. Mitchell was very specific about how she wanted her final wishes to be communicated. Unusual how? Dad asked, and I caught a slight tremor in his voice. Your grandmother left extensive instructions about not only what she wanted to bequeath, but how and when she wanted these bequests to be revealed. She also left personal letters for each of you, which I'll distribute after reading the relevant portions of the will. Mr. Henderson pulled out a thick document, easily 20 pages long. This wasn't the simple 2-page will I'd been expecting. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell's last will and testament was executed 14 months ago, well before her passing, and has been updated several times in the months preceding her death. She was very clear about her mental competency at the time of these revisions, and we have multiple witnesses and medical documentation to that effect. Why would he need to emphasize her mental competency unless he expected someone to challenge the will? Now, Mr. Henderson continued, Mrs. Mitchell requested that I begin with a statement she wrote specifically for this moment. He cleared his throat and began to read in Eleanor's unmistakable voice, "To my family gathered here today. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone and certain events have unfolded exactly as I predicted they would. I want you to know that everything I'm about to reveal has been carefully planned and thoroughly considered. I've spent my final years watching this family closely, and I've made decisions based not on sentiment, but on truth. What follows may surprise you, but I hope it will ultimately lead to justice and healing." The room had gone completely silent. Even Madison had stopped fidgeting with her phone. She goes on to say, Mr. Henderson continued, that she specifically timed this will reading to occur after Madison's wedding and after Sarah's medical crisis, because she wanted to observe how the family would handle these events before her final wishes were revealed. My heart stopped. Eleanor had known about my surgery, but she died months before my diagnosis. "I don't understand," Mom said faintly. "Mother died last September. Sarah's surgery wasn't until May." Mr. Henderson looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Mitchell was quite prophetic about certain family patterns. She predicted that Sarah would face a significant medical event that would conflict with Madison's wedding, and that the family would choose to prioritize the wedding. She was, unfortunately, entirely correct. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents looked stricken. Madison looked confused. And I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Eleanor had known. Somehow, she'd seen this coming and had planned accordingly. "Shall we proceed with the will?" Mr. Henderson asked. Though what wasn't really a question, we all nodded, though I suspect none of us were prepared for what came next. Mr. Henderson adjusted his reading glasses and turned to the first page of bequests. "Let's begin with the real estate holdings." "Holdings?" Dad interrupted. "You mean her house?" "Houses," Mr. Henderson corrected gently. Mrs. Mitchell owned several properties. He consulted the document. First, the family home at 428 Maple Street, where Robert and Linda Mitchell currently reside. My parents exchanged glances. "Mother's house?" "But we've been living there for 15 years, Mom said, confusion clear in her voice. "Actually, you've been living in Mrs. Mitchell's house for 15 years, Mr. Henderson clarified. "The property deed has remained in Eleanor Mitchell's name since 1978. You've been essentially her tenants, though she never charged you rent." The color drained from Dad's face. "That's impossible." "We've been paying the mortgage, the property, taxes, the insurance. You've been paying what Mrs. Mitchell asked you to pay, which amounted to the carrying costs of the property. But the mortgage was paid off in 1985, and the property has been owned free and clear by Mrs. Mitchell ever since. I felt like I was watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. My parents had been living in what they thought was their own home, but it had actually belonged to Eleanor all along. "There are also the rental properties," Mr. Henderson continued, consulting another page. "The duplex on Oak Avenue, the 4-unit apartment building on Pine Street, and the commercial property downtown that houses Mitchell's hardware store." "Mitchell's hardware?" Madison spoke for the first time, her voice small. "But that's been in our family for generations." "It has indeed. Mrs. Mitchell purchased the building from her late husband's estate in 1982 and has been the landlord ever since. The current tenant pays $4,200 per month in rent, which has provided Mrs. Mitchell with a substantial income for the past 4 decades. I was struggling to process this information. Eleanor, who'd lived so modestly, had actually been a significant property owner. The woman who'd served us tea in chipped cups and drove a 15-year-old sedan had been quietly accumulating real estate for decades. The total value of the real estate portfolio, Mr. Henderson continued, is approximately $2.8 million. Mom actually gasped. Madison's mouth fell open. Dad gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles went white. "Now regarding The disposition of these properties, Mr. Henderson turned the page. Mrs. Mitchell has left very specific instructions. The family home at 428 Maple Street, where Robert and Linda Mitchell currently reside, is bequeathed entirely to Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, along with all associated rental income from the other properties. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. I felt dizzy, disconnected from reality. Eleanor had left me my parents' house, and rental properties worth millions. There must be some mistake, Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. There's no mistake, Mr. Henderson replied firmly. Mrs. Mitchell was very clear about this bequest. She also left a letter explaining her reasoning, which I'll read now. He pulled out a sealed envelope marked with my name in Eleanor's careful handwriting. Breaking the seal, he unfolded a single sheet of paper. My dearest Sarah, he read aloud, by now you know that I've left you the family properties. This may seem surprising to others, but it shouldn't surprise you. You've always been the most responsible member of this family, the one who thinks of others before herself, the one who solves problems instead of creating them. I've watched you give and give while receiving little in return, and I've decided it's time for that to change. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, but I couldn't look at them. Eleanor's words were cutting too close to truths I'd never acknowledged. Even to myself, Mr. Henderson continued reading. I know that by the time you hear this, you will have faced a medical crisis alone because your family chose to prioritize Madison's wedding over your health. This decision confirmed what I've observed. For years that your value to this family has been measured by what you can provide, not by who you are. The properties I'm leaving you represent not just financial security, but the power to decide your own worth. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Mom's quiet crying. Sarah, you now own the house your parents live in. You have the right to decide whether they remain there and under what conditions. Use this power wisely, but use it. It's time for this family to understand that kindness and confidence deserve respect, not exploitation. When Mr. Henderson finished reading, nobody spoke for a long moment. The magnitude of what had just happened was still sinking in. I owned my parents' house. I owned their security, their stability, their future. Eleanor had given me the ultimate power over the people who had spent 32 years treating me as less important than my younger sister. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Mr. Henderson wasn't finished. As my family sat in stunned silence processing the property revelations, he turned to another section of the will. Now we come to the financial bequests, he said, pulling out a folder thick with bank statements and investment documents. Mrs. Mitchell was quite astute with her investments over the years. More surprises? Dad asked weakly. I'm afraid so. Mrs. Mitchell maintained several investment accounts, a substantial savings account, and most significantly, a trust fund that was established 32 years ago. 32 years ago, the year one was born. The trust fund was set up for Sarah Mitchell and has been accumulating value since her birth. Mrs. Mitchell made regular contributions throughout Sarah's childhood and adolescence, though she requested that the beneficiary not be informed until this moment. I felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold. A trust fund for me? Yes. The current value is $847,000, which includes the original contributions plus 3 decades of compound interest. And investment growth, Mrs. Mitchell was quite conservative with the investments, focusing on stable, long-term growth rather than high-risk ventures. Madison finally found her voice. $800,000? Grandma Eleanor had that kind of money? Mrs. Mitchell was very careful with her finances. She lived frugally not because she had to, but because she chose to. Every dollar she didn't spend on herself, she invested for Sarah's future. The math was staggering. While my parents had been putting all their resources into Madison's education, travel, and lifestyle, Eleanor had been quietly building a fortune for me. While I was working multiple jobs to pay for college and struggling to launch my design business, I'd had nearly $1 million waiting for me. There's more, Mr. Henderson continued. Mrs. Mitchell also maintained a separate savings account, with $312,000, which she's divided equally between Robert, Linda, and Madison Mitchell $104,000 each. $100,000 each. It was a substantial amount, but nothing compared to what Eleanor had left me. Finally, Mr. Henderson said, there are the personal effects and family heirlooms. The jewelry, artwork, and antique furniture had been appraised at approximately $75,000 in total value. These items are also bequeathed to Sarah, with the exception of Mrs. Mitchell's wedding ring, which goes to Madison. I looked at my sister, who was staring at the table with tears in her eyes. A single ring versus everything else Eleanor had treasured. Why? Mom whispered. Why did she do this? Mr. Henderson pulled out another letter. Mrs. Mitchell anticipated this question. She wrote, I've given Sarah what she earned through 32 years of loyalty, kindness, and responsibility. I've given the others what they've earned through 32 years of taking her for granted. Sarah deserves to understand her true value, and the rest of you deserve to understand the consequences of your choices, the brutal honesty of Eleanor's. Words hung in the air. She hadn't just redistributed her wealth, she'd made a statement about family dynamics that could never be taken back. There's one final element to the trust fund, Mr. Henderson added. Mrs. Mitchell included a provision that if Sarah's family failed to support her during a significant medical crisis, an additional $200,000 would be released from a separate account she maintained. Given the circumstances surrounding Sarah's recent surgery, he didn't need to finish. My family's absence during my surgery had triggered another massive bequest. The total inheritance for Sarah Mitchell is therefore approximately $3.9 million, plus the ongoing rental income from the properties, which amounts to roughly $8,000 per month. I was a multimillionaire. I owned my parents' home. I had a passive income that exceeded what most people made working full-time. Eleanor hadn't just given me financial security. She'd given me complete independence and the power to rewrite the dynamics of our family. The woman who'd never raised her voice, never made demands, never sought attention had delivered the most powerful message of all. She'd shown my family exactly what 32 years of overlooking me had cost them, and she'd shown me exactly how much I was worth to someone who truly saw me. Mr. Henderson wasn't finished with his revelations. As we sat in shocked silence, he reached for one final envelope, this one sealed with red wax and marked, to be read only after all bequests have been announced. Mrs. Mitchell left one last letter, he said solemnly. She called it the truth that changes everything. I watched my parents' faces grow even paler, if that was possible. Dad's hands were shaking slightly, and Mom had stopped crying and was now staring at the envelope with what looked like dread. Before I read this, Mr. Henderson said carefully, Mrs. Mitchell wanted me to explain that she spent the last 5 years of her life researching family documents, conducting interviews with relatives, and hiring a private investigator to verify certain information. She was very thorough in her fact-checking. A private investigator? Madison asked. Why would Grandma Eleanor need a private investigator? Mr. Henderson broke the wax seal and unfolded several pages of Eleanor's handwriting, along with what appeared to be official documents. This letter is addressed to the entire family, but specifically to Sarah. He cleared his throat and began to read, My dearest family, by now you're wondering why. I've left the majority of my estate to Sarah. The simple answer is that she's earned it through her character and actions. But there's a more complex answer. That involves a secret this family has kept for 32 years. My heart began beating faster. What secret could be worth mentioning in a will? Sarah, what I'm about to reveal may shock you, but I hope it will also explain many things about your place in this family. You're not Robert and Linda's biological daughter. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped my hand, flying to my mouth. Around the table, my parents, Robert and Linda, looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. Mr. Henderson continued reading. You were born to Linda's younger sister, Catherine, who was unmarried and unable to care for a child. Robert and Linda agreed to adopt you when you were 3 days old, but they made a decision to keep this adoption secret from you and from most of the family. I felt like I was drowning. Catherine. I had vague memories of an aunt who'd visited, occasionally when I was very young, then seemed to disappear from our lives. I'd been told she'd moved away, that she'd lost touch with the family. The reason I'm revealing this now, Eleanor's letter continued, is not to hurt anyone, but to explain the guilt and overcompensation that has shaped your family dynamics for over 3 decades. Robert and Linda felt guilty about keeping your adoption secret, especially as you grew into such a remarkable young woman. But instead of addressing their guilt honestly, they overcompensated by lavishing attention on Madison, their biological daughter, while treating you as a guest in your own home. Everything was suddenly making sense in the most painful way possible. The preferential treatment, the way I'd always felt like an outsider, the subtle but constant message that Madison was more important, all stemmed from a secret they'd been keeping my entire life. I discovered this truth 2 years ago when Catherine contacted me before her death. She'd been following your life from a distance and wanted me to know how proud she was of the woman you'd become. She also wanted me to know that she'd left a small inheritance for you, which I've incorporated into the trust fund. Mr. Henderson paused to pull out a birth certificate, my original birth certificate with Catherine Mitchell's name listed. As my mother, Sarah, he continued reading. Your biological mother loved you enough to give you to a family she thought could provide better for you. Robert and Linda loved you enough to raise you as their own. But their inability to tell you the truth created a dynamic where you were always trying to earn a place that was already yours by right. I looked at the people I called Mom and Dad my entire life. They were crying now, both of them, and the shame on their faces was unmistakable. This inheritance isn't just about money, Eleanor's letter concluded. It's about giving you the power to decide with full knowledge of the truth what kind of family relationships you want moving forward. You owe them nothing, not gratitude for raising you, not forgiveness for lying to you, not acceptance of their continued favoritism toward Madison. But if you choose to maintain relationships with them, let it be because you want to, not because you feel obligated to. The room was completely silent except for the sound of muffled sobs. I felt like my entire identity had been shattered and rebuilt in the span of 5 minutes. I wasn't who I thought I was. The family dynamics I'd struggled with my whole life had been based on a lie. And the woman who'd left me millions of dollars had done so not just because she loved me, but because she'd known the truth about my origins and the guilt that had shaped my childhood. Eleanor had given me more than money. She'd given me the truth, and with it, the power to choose who I wanted to be. The silence in the conference room stretched on until I finally found my voice. How long were you planning to keep this secret? Linda, I struggled with what to call her, now looked up through her tears. Forever, she whispered. We thought it would be easier for everyone if you never knew. Easier for who? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Because it hasn't been easier for me. I've spent 32 years wondering why I never felt like I belonged, why Madison always came. First, why I had to work so hard for scraps of attention. That's not true, Robert said weakly. We love you just as much. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. Don't lie to me anymore. You've had 32 years to tell me the truth, and instead you chose to let me believe there was something fundamentally wrong with me. Madison spoke for the first time since the revelation. Sarah, I had no idea. I swear I didn't know. I looked at my sister, my adopted sister, and saw genuine shock in her eyes. I believe you. But that doesn't change the fact that you benefited from their guilt while I suffered from it. We did our best, Linda said defensively. We gave you everything we could. You gave me everything except honesty and equal treatment. I interrupted. You gave me a home but never let me feel secure in it. You raised me but never let me feel truly wanted. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat gently. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in private. I can provide copies of all relevant documents and contact information for the financial institutions managing the accounts. Wait, I said, turning back to my adoptive parents. I have questions that need answers now. They nodded reluctantly. Did Catherine want to stay in contact with me? Robert and Linda exchanged glances before Linda answered. She asked to visit. Once a year to see how you were growing up, We ... We told her it would be too confusing for you. So you cut her out of my life completely? We thought it was best, Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. Best for who? Did it ever occur to you that I might have wanted to know my birth mother? That I might have benefited from having more people who loved me in my life? We were afraid you'd want to live with her instead, Linda admitted. We were afraid we'd lose you. So instead, you made sure I never felt fully yours to begin with. I shook my head. Do you realize how much damage you've done? All these years I blamed myself for not being good enough, not being worthy of the same love you gave Madison. I've spent my entire adult life overcompensating, trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Sarah, please. Linda reached across the table toward me. You have to understand, we were young, we were scared. You were scared? I pulled back from her reach. I was 3 days old. I was the one who had no choice in any of this. And then when I was old enough to understand, you continued to choose deception over trust. Madison had been quiet, but now she spoke up. What does this mean for us, as sisters? I really looked at her, and realized that despite everything, I didn't blame her for our parents' choices. I don't know yet. We're still sisters, but we need to figure out what that means now that everything's changed. And what about us? Robert asked. What does this mean for our relationship? I considered the question carefully. These people had raised me, fed me, housed me, educated me. They'd also lied to me, favored Madison over me, and abandoned me during my medical crisis. Eleanor's inheritance had given me the power to choose my response to all of it. It means, I said slowly, that I'm going to take some time to process this information. I'm going to learn everything I can about Catherine, my birth mother. I'm going to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. But we can work through this as a family, right? Linda asked desperately. I don't know what we are anymore, I said honestly. But I do know that I'm done pretending that abandoning me during my surgery was acceptable. I'm done pretending that 32 years of favoritism didn't matter. And I'm done making excuses for choices that hurt me. I stood up feeling stronger than I had in months. Mr. Henderson, I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss the practical aspects of managing the inheritance. And I'd like contact information for that private investigator Eleanor used. I want to learn everything I can about Catherine. Of course. I'll have my assistant set up appointments for next week. I turned back to my family, my complicated, damaged, lying family. I need time to think about what comes next. Don't contact me unless it's an emergency. When I'm ready to talk, I'll call you. As I walked toward the door, Eleanor's final letter in my hand, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The power to set my own terms for love and acceptance. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. 3 days after the will reading, I sat in my apartment surrounded by legal documents, bank statements, and property deeds that represented my new reality. The numbers were still surreal, nearly $4 million in assets, plus monthly rental income that exceeded what I'd been making annually from my design business. But the most significant document was the one I held in my hands, the mortgage papers for 428 Maple Street, my childhood home. The house where Robert and Linda had raised me, where Madison had grown up as the golden child, where 32 years of family dynamics had played out. I now owned it all. Mr. Henderson had explained the legal implications during our follow-up meeting. Since Eleanor had owned the property outright, there was no existing mortgage. Robert and Linda had been paying what they thought were mortgage payments, but those funds had actually been going into a separate account that Eleanor had maintained for property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. That account now belonged to me as well, with a balance of $47,000. Essentially, Mr. Henderson had explained, your adoptive parents are now your tenants, though no formal lease exists. You have the legal right to establish rental terms, require a lease agreement, or ask them to vacate the property entirely. The power was intoxicating and terrifying. I could evict the people who'd raised me. I could charge them market rate rent, which in their neighborhood would be approximately $3,200 per month. Or I could continue the existing arrangement, essentially allowing them to live there for free while they paid the carrying costs. Eleanor's final letter had included specific guidance about this decision. Sarah, don't let guilt or obligation dictate your choice about the house. Make this decision based on what serves your own healing and growth. If maintaining the status quo enables their continued poor treatment of you, then change is necessary. If establishing new boundaries helps them understand your worth, then do it. But whatever you decide, make sure it serves you, not their comfort. My phone had been ringing constantly since Friday. Linda had called 17 times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. Robert had sent formal emails requesting a meeting to discuss the family situation. Madison had texted daily, asking if I was okay and whether I wanted to talk. I'd ignored them all, needing space to process not just the inheritance, but the revelation about my adoption. The private investigator Eleanor had hired, a woman named Patricia Reeves, had provided me with a detailed file about Catherine Mitchell. My birth mother had been 22 when I was born, working as a nurse while putting herself through school. She'd been in a relationship with a married man who'd refused to leave his wife, leaving Catherine to face single motherhood alone. The file included photos of Catherine, a woman who looked remarkably like me, with the same dark hair and green eyes I'd always wondered about. Robert and Linda both had blue eyes and light brown hair, and had spent my childhood inventing explanations for why I looked so different from my parents. Catherine had died 18 months ago from cancer, just 2 months before Eleanor. She'd never married, but had built a successful career as a nurse practitioner and had apparently followed my life from a distance. The investigator had found letters Catherine had written, but never sent birthday wishes. Congratulations on my college graduation, pride in my business success. She'd loved me from afar for 32 years, respecting the adoption agreement. Even as it broke her heart, on Wednesday evening, I finally made my decision about the house. I called Mr. Henderson and asked him to draft a formal lease agreement for 428 Maple Street. What terms would you like to include? He asked. Market rate rent of $3,200 per month with a 12-month lease term. Security deposit of first and last month's rent. And I want a clause that allows me to terminate the lease with 60 days notice for any reason. Those are quite reasonable terms for the current market. Are you planning to serve them with the lease immediately? No, I want to meet with them first. I want to establish some ground rules for our future relationship, assuming we have one. Very wise. Would you like me to present the lease, or would you prefer to handle that conversation yourself? I'll handle it, but I want you there as a witness when I do. Friday evening, I called Robert and Linda and asked them to meet me at Mr. Henderson's office on Monday morning. I didn't explain why, just said it was about our future arrangements. Sarah, please. Linda's voice was strained. Can't we just talk at home as a family? No, I said firmly. We're going to handle this formally with legal representation present. If you want to continue living in the house, you'll need to agree to my terms. The silence on the other end told me they understood. The days of taking my accommodation for granted were over. Monday morning, I sat across from Robert and Linda in the same conference room where Eleanor's will had been read. This time, I was the one with the power, the one setting the agenda. I've decided to allow you to continue living in the house, I began without preamble, but there will be conditions. Relief flooded their faces, quickly followed by apprehension, as they waited for the other shoe to drop. You'll sign a formal lease agreement paying market rate rent. You'll treat me with the same respect you'd show any landlord, and if you want to rebuild any kind of relationship with me, you'll start with acknowledging the damage your choices have caused. I slid the lease across the table. As they read the terms, I watched their faces register the reality of their new situation. They were about to pay me $3,200 every month for the privilege of living in what they thought was their own home. Eleanor's justice was poetic, precise, and absolutely perfect. The lease signing was uncomfortable but necessary. Robert and Linda reviewed every clause with the careful attention of people who finally understood their precarious position. When Linda questioned the 60-day termination clause, I looked her directly in the eye. That clause exists because I need to know I can remove toxic people from my life if necessary. Whether or not you fall into that category depends entirely on your behavior going forward. They signed without further questions, but the lease was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, I established a comprehensive set of boundaries that fundamentally changed our family dynamic. No more last-minute requests for free design work. No more guilt trips about family obligations. No more dismissing my needs in favor of Madison's wants. Most importantly, I made it clear that rebuilding our relationship would require genuine accountability for their past behavior. I want a written apology, I told them during our second meeting. Not a general, sorry if you were hurt statement, but specific acknowledgement of what you did wrong and how it affected me. That seems extreme, Robert said. Can't we just move forward? Moving forward without acknowledging the past is what got us here in the first place. I'm 32 years old, and I've just learned that my entire identity was built on a lie. You don't get to skip the accountability step. The apology letter arrived a week later. It was 3 pages long and clearly took significant effort to write. Linda acknowledged their guilt about the adoption secret and how it had influenced their treatment of Madison and me. Robert admitted to using my competence as an excuse to neglect my emotional needs. They both apologized specifically for missing my surgery and for the pattern of prioritizing Madison that had defined my childhood. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and it was a start. Madison's relationship with me required different boundaries. She hadn't been complicit in the lies about my adoption, but she had benefited from the preferential treatment without ever questioning it. I want you to understand something, I told her during our first one-on-one conversation since the will. I don't blame you for being the favorite, but I do need you to acknowledge that it happened and that it affected me. I honestly didn't realize it was that obvious, she said, tears in her eyes. I mean, I knew Mom and Dad were generous with me, but I thought that was just because I needed more help. You needed more help because they never expected you to be self-sufficient. They expected me to be responsible for myself and for fixing everyone else's problems too. Madison was quiet for a long moment. You're right. And I took advantage of that. I let you handle everything because it was easier than dealing with things myself. What I need going forward, I said, is a sister who sees me as an equal, not as a resource to be used when convenient. I want that too, she said. But I don't know how to be that person yet. I've never had to be responsible for myself. It was the most honest thing Madison had ever said to me, and it gave me hope that we could build something real between us. The changes in our family dynamic were immediate and dramatic. Robert and Linda began treating me with a formality that felt strange but necessary. They asked permission before visiting my apartment. They respected my schedule when planning family gatherings. They stopped making assumptions about my availability or willingness to help with projects. Most surprisingly, they began asking for my input on decisions that affected the family. When Madison needed help planning her first wedding anniversary celebration, they consulted me about whether I wanted to be involved rather than simply assigning me tasks. We've been thinking, Linda said during one of our monthly check-in calls, that we need to establish some new family traditions. Ones that include you as a full participant, not just as the person who makes everything work. What did you have in mind? We'd like to start having regular family dinners where we take turns cooking and hosting. And we'd like to plan a trip to visit Catherine's grave, if you're interested. We found out where she's buried, and we thought maybe we owe her that respect. I was surprised by the gesture. You'd want to do that? We've been doing a lot of thinking about the choices we made, Robert said. Catherine gave you to us because she thought we could give you a better life. In some ways we did, but in other ways we failed her trust. Visiting her grave feels like the right thing to do. The trip to Catherine's grave became a turning point for our family. Standing beside the headstone of the woman who'd given me life, surrounded by the people who'd raised me, I felt something shift. The anger and hurt were still there, but they no longer consumed all the space in my heart. I'm sorry we kept her from you, Linda said quietly. I'm sorry we robbed you of the chance to know her. I'm sorry too, I said. And for the first time in months, I meant it. The new boundaries I'd established weren't just about punishing my family for their past mistakes. They were about creating space for something healthier to grow. And slowly, carefully, that's exactly what began to happen. 6 months after Eleanor's will reading, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, removing the last of my eye bandages. Dr. Martinez had been right about the excellent prognosis. My vision had returned to nearly normal with only minor peripheral effects that didn't impact my daily life or work, but the real healing had been emotional, not physical. The inheritance had given me more than financial security. It had given me the freedom to choose my relationships consciously rather than accepting them out of obligation or fear. For the first time in my life, I could afford to walk away from toxic dynamics, which paradoxically made it possible to stay and work towards something better. My design business had flourished once I'd stopped working for free. The financial pressure was gone, allowing me to be selective about projects and clients. I'd even hired an assistant and moved into a larger studio space. The irony wasn't lost on me that Eleanor's gift had freed me to succeed in ways I never imagined possible, but perhaps the most meaningful change was how I'd chosen to use the inheritance. I'd established the Catherine Mitchell Memorial Foundation, focusing on supporting young single mothers pursuing higher education. The foundation provided scholarships, childcare assistance, and mentorship programs, all the support Catherine might have needed but never received. The foundation's first recipient was a 23-year-old nursing student named Maria, who reminded me powerfully of what Catherine must have faced. At the scholarship ceremony, I found myself thinking about how proud my birth mother would have been to see her story helping other women pursue their dreams. "This is beautiful," Madison said, appearing beside me at the reception. She'd volunteered to help with the event, marking a significant change in our relationship dynamic. "Thank you for helping organize it," I said. "It means a lot to have you involved." Madison had been working hard to redefine herself over the past months. She'd gotten a part-time job, her first real employment, and had started managing her own finances instead of relying on Robert and Linda's support. The change wasn't easy for her, but it was necessary for our relationship to have any authentic foundation. "I've been thinking about what you said about being equals," she said. "I realize I never asked you about your recovery from the surgery. I never asked if you were scared or if you needed anything. I was so focused on my wedding that I couldn't see past my own needs. I was terrified," I admitted. "Not just about losing my vision, but about facing it alone. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there, and I'm sorry it took a will reading for me to understand how selfish I've been." It was the kind of conversation we'd never had before, honest, vulnerable, and focused on something other than Madison's immediate needs. Robert and Linda had also been working to change patterns that had defined their parenting for over 3 decades. They'd started couples therapy to address the guilt and poor communication that had led to their problematic favoritism. They'd also begun individual therapy to understand how their own childhoods had influenced their parenting choices. We realized now that we were so afraid of you feeling rejected because of the adoption that we overcompensated by making Madison the obvious favorite, Linda explained during one of our monthly dinners. "We thought if we gave you stability and Madison attention, everyone would be happy. Instead, you made me feel like I had to earn love while teaching Madison that love was unconditional for her, but not for others." I said, "Exactly. And we're working to understand how to be better for both of you, but especially for you." The progress wasn't linear, and there were still moments of tension and misunderstanding. But for the first time, my family was working to understand and change harmful patterns rather than simply expecting me to accept them. One evening, as I was closing up my design studio, I found a package waiting by the door. Inside was a carefully wrapped photo album with a note from Linda. "These are all the photos I took of you growing up that I never put in the family albums. I kept them separate because I was afraid they would prompt questions about your adoption. I wanted you to have them now, evidence that you were loved and celebrated, even when we did a poor job of showing it." The album was filled with candid shots of me throughout my childhood birthday parties, school events, quiet moments reading or drawing. In many of the photos, I looked genuinely happy, surrounded by family members who clearly cared about me, even if they'd struggled to express. Consistently, on the last page was a recent photo I didn't remember being taken. It was from the Foundation's scholarship ceremony, showing me presenting the award to Maria. My face was radiant with purpose and joy, and I looked confident in a way I'd never seen in my childhood photos. Below the image, Linda had written, "This is the woman Catherine would be proud to call her daughter, and the woman we're proud to call ours. Thank you for giving us the chance to do better." I sat in my car outside the studio, tears streaming down my face as I looked through the album. It was evidence of love that had been imperfect but real, documentation of a family that had failed me in significant ways, but had also provided foundation for the person I'd become. The thank you card I'd received from the Vision Research Foundation lay on my passenger seat acknowledgement of the substantial donation I'd made in honor of Dr. Martinez and the surgical team who'd saved my sight. The money that might have gone toward Madison's wedding expenses had instead funded research that could help other people avoid the crisis. I faced Dot as I drove home to my apartment, the one I could now afford to keep even while paying for the larger studio space. I reflected on how completely my life had changed. I was financially secure, professionally successful, and for the first time, emotionally free to choose my family relationships rather than simply endure them. Eleanor's gift hadn't just been money. It had been perspective, power, and most importantly, proof that someone had seen my true worth all along. The grandmother who'd served tea in chipped cups had been quietly observing, planning, and ensuring that justice would eventually prevail. The healing was far from complete, but it had finally begun. 1 year after the will reading, our family gathered for Eleanor's birthday memorial, a tradition I'd established to honor the woman who'd changed all our lives. We met at the community garden she'd loved, each of us bringing something that represented how she'd influenced us. The gathering itself was evidence of how much changed. Robert and Linda arrived punctually, respecting the schedule I'd set rather than assuming I'd accommodate their preferences. Madison brought homemade cookies, her first attempt at baking anything from scratch, instead of expecting someone else to handle the food. And I felt comfortable asserting my needs and boundaries without fear of being labeled difficult or ungrateful. "I brought this," Madison said, pulling out a framed photo of Eleanor teaching her to knit when she was 8 years old. I'd forgotten about these lessons until I found this picture. Grandma Eleanor was always trying to teach me practical skills, but I was too impatient to learn. I wish I'd paid better attention. "She was very patient with all of us," Linda said, placing a potted herb garden beside Eleanor's memorial stone, even when we disappointed her. "Especially then," I added, setting down my contribution, a leather journal filled with Eleanor's favorite recipes that I collected from family members and friends. She never gave up on people, even when they gave up on themselves. Robert had brought Eleanor's old gardening tools, now restored and sharpened. I thought we could use these to plant something together. Something that would grow and thrive, like the lessons she taught us. It was a beautiful gesture, and the metaphor wasn't lost on anyone. We spent the afternoon planting a small rose garden, working together in a way that felt both familiar and completely new. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," Madison said, as we worked. "Not the kind where we pretend bad things didn't happen, but the kind where we choose to build something better going forward. What does that look like for you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "It looks like me taking responsibility for my own life instead of expecting others to manage things for me. It looks like appreciating what you've done for our family instead of taking it for granted. And it looks like being the kind of sister who supports you instead of competing with you." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had as a family. We talked honestly about the patterns that had defined our relationships, the changes we'd all made, and the ongoing work required to maintain healthier dynamics. "I need you all to understand something," I said as we finished planting. "The inheritance gave me the power to cut you out of my life completely. I chose not to do that, but that choice isn't permanent. It's something I remake every day based on how I'm treated and whether our relationships serve my well-being." "We understand," Linda said, "and we're grateful that you've given us the opportunity to do better. But I also want you to know that I'm genuinely happy with the progress we've made," I continued. For the first time in my life, I feel like I have a family that sees me clearly and values me appropriately. As we packed up our gardening supplies, Madison handed me an envelope. This is something I've been working on with my therapist. It's a letter about what having you as a sister has meant to me and how I want our relationship to be different going forward. I tucked the letter into my purse to read later, but her gesture meant everything. The sister who'd once taken my support for granted was now actively working to appreciate and reciprocate it. On the drive home, I stopped by the house on Maple Street, my house, to collect the monthly rent. It was a transaction that had become routine but still carried symbolic weight. Robert handed me the check with a smile that seemed genuinely grateful rather than resentful. "The house is looking great," I said, noting the new landscaping they'd added to the front yard. "We're trying to take better care of it," he said. "It feels different knowing it belongs to you, more precious somehow." As I left their house, I reflected on how the power dynamic had shifted not just legally but emotionally. I was no longer the daughter desperately seeking approval. I was an independent woman who chose to maintain family relationships because they enriched her life rather than because she felt obligated to do so. That evening, I opened Madison's letter. It was 5 pages of honest reflection about our childhood, acknowledgement of the privileges she'd enjoyed, and genuine appreciation for the ways I'd supported her throughout our lives. She wrote about her commitment to changing the patterns that had defined our relationship and her excitement about building something more equitable between us. The last paragraph brought tears to my eyes. "Sarah, I'm finally learning to see you the way Grandma Eleanor always did, as someone remarkable who deserves to be celebrated, not just relied upon. Thank you for not giving up on our family. And thank you for showing me what it means to love someone without trying to diminish them." Looking around my apartment, the space that represented my independence and self-determination, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete satisfaction with my place in my family. Not because I'd finally earned their love, but because I'd learned to value myself enough to demand it. 2 years after Eleanor's will reading, I found myself standing in her old kitchen, now mine after I decided to move into the small house she'd left me along with the other properties. The ceramic roosters still lined the windowsill, the herb garden still flourished, and somehow being surrounded by her belongings made me feel connected to the wisdom she quietly shared throughout my life. Was hosting Eleanor's birthday memorial dinner for the second time, but this year felt different. The relationships in our family had stabilized into something that felt both authentic and sustainable. Robert and Linda had completed their therapy and were consistently demonstrating the changes they committed to making. Madison had grown into genuine independence and was planning her own move across the country for a job opportunity, a decision she'd made and announced herself, without seeking anyone else's permission or financial support. "I have something for you," Madison said as we finished cleaning up after dinner. She handed me a wooden recipe box that I recognized immediately. It had belonged to Eleanor and had been sitting in the estate's storage since her death. "Madison, this should go to all of us. These are family recipes." "No," she said firmly. Grandma Eleanor specifically left instructions about this box. Mr. Henderson gave it to Mom and Dad to pass along when they felt the family was ready for it. "They asked me to give it to you tonight." I opened the box carefully, expecting to find the index cards covered in Eleanor's careful handwriting that I remembered from my childhood. Instead, there was a letter on top, sealed and addressed to me. "She wrote this?" I asked. Apparently, she updated it several times in the months before she died, Linda said, joining us in the kitchen. "Mr. Henderson said she was very specific about when it should be given to you." I opened the envelope with trembling hands and began to read. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means my plan worked and our family has begun to heal from the wounds that defined it for so many years. The recipe box contains more than just instructions for cooking. It contains the wisdom I gathered over 86 years about what makes a family strong. I want you to know that everything I did was intended to give you the tools to choose your own path. The inheritance wasn't punishment for your family, though I'm sure it felt that way initially. It was empowerment for you. The money and property were meant to give you options so that any relationship you maintained would be based on genuine, affection rather than obligation or need. I also want you to know that watching you grow into the remarkable woman you became was one of my greatest joys. You inherited the best qualities from both Catherine and from the family that raised you. You have Catherine's strength and compassion, and you have Robert and Linda's resilience and determination. Even though they didn't always know how to nurture those qualities in you, the truth about your adoption was difficult to reveal, but necessary. Secrets have a way of poisoning relationships, and I wanted you to have all the information you needed to make informed choices about your future. Catherine would be so proud of the woman you've become and the way you've used your success, too. Help others. Finally, I want you to understand that the recipe box is meant to be shared when you're ready. When you have your own family, however you choose to define that, these recipes are meant to feed the people you love. But first, they're meant to feed you. Take care of yourself, dear one. You've spent so many years taking care of others. The most important recipe is on the bottom of the box. It's not for food, but for happiness. I learned it late in life, and I hope you'll learn it much sooner than I did. All my love and all my pride in the extraordinary woman you are, Grandma Eleanor. I looked up to find my family watching me with expressions of love and anticipation. These people who had hurt me, disappointed me, and ultimately fought to earn back my trust were now genuinely invested in my happiness. I reached into the bottom of the recipe box and found one final card. This one different from the others. Instead of ingredients and cooking instructions, it contained Eleanor's recipe for happiness. Start with a foundation of self-respect. Add generous portions of boundaries clearly stated and consistently maintained. Mix in equal parts forgiveness for others and yourself, and accountability demanded from others and practiced yourself. Season with gratitude for what you have rather than resentment for what you lack. Let it all simmer slowly with patience for the process and faith in the outcome. Serves one, but can be shared with those who appreciate its value. I laughed through my tears, recognizing Eleanor's gentle wisdom even in her final message. What does it say? Madison asked. I read the recipe aloud, and we all sat in comfortable silence for a moment, absorbing the simplicity and profundity of Eleanor's final lesson. She really did think of everything, didn't she? Robert said softly. She had a lot of time to observe and plan, I said. And she loved us enough to do the hard work of ensuring we'd all be okay. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in Eleanor's kitchen, my kitchen now surrounded by the recipes that represented generations of family love and wisdom. I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment, the betrayal that had broken my heart, the inheritance that had changed my life, and the long process of rebuilding relationships on terms that honored my worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez's office reminding me of my annual eye exam scheduled for next week. 2 years later, my vision remained excellent, but more importantly, I could finally see my family clearly, their flaws and strengths, their capacity for growth, and their ongoing commitment to doing better. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the garden Eleanor and I had planted together so many years ago. Inside, I was warm, surrounded by evidence of love that had been imperfect but ultimately transformative. Opened the recipe box again and selected a card for Eleanor's famous apple pie. Tomorrow, I would make it for the first time since her death, and I would share it with people who had learned to value not just what I could give them, but who I was as a person. The recipe called for patience, precision, and a generous amount of love. After everything we'd been through as a family, I finally had all 3 ingredients in abundance.